They say weddings are supposed to bring families together. But as I stood at the back of the church, clutching a manila envelope so tightly my knuckles turned white, I realized some weddings only reveal how far a family can fall apart. I could see my sister, Lila, at the altar, her veil shimmering in the late afternoon light. She looked radiant, the picture of innocence and joy, but I knew the truth. I knew what she'd done, and I knew that before the day was over, everyone else would know too. My heart hammered in my chest, not from nerves, but from the ache of betrayal. The scent of lilies and old wood filled the air, mingling with the low hum of whispered conversations. I felt like an intruder in my own life, a stranger at my own sister's wedding. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when Lila and I were inseparable, two halves of the same whole. We grew up in a small town where everyone knew your name and your business. Our house was a modest two-story on Maple Lane, with peeling white paint and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. My father, George, ran the local hardware store, and my mother, Evelyn, was a school secretary. We weren't rich, but we had enough. More importantly, we had each other. Lila was 2 years younger, but she always seemed older somehow, bolder, brighter, more willing to take risks. She was the kind of girl who could talk her way out of trouble and into anyone's good graces. I was quieter, more cautious, the one who followed the rules and kept the peace. Our childhood was filled with small joys, chasing fireflies in the backyard, sharing secrets under the covers, fighting over the last piece of pie. My father used to say, "You girls are my greatest treasure." He'd ruffle our hair and pull us into a bear hug, his laughter rumbling in his chest. As we grew older, life got more complicated. I went to nursing school and came back to work at the local clinic. Lila bounced from job to job, waitress, receptionist, boutique clerk, never settling, always searching for something more. But no matter how different we became, I always believed we'd be there for each other. Sisters, after all, are supposed to be forever. When our mother passed away suddenly, it was just the three of us. Me, Lila, and Dad. Grief has a way of changing people. My father grew quieter, his hair turning silver almost overnight. Lila threw herself into planning her future, talking about moving to the city, starting a business, finding a husband. I stayed close, helping Dad with the house, making sure he ate, making sure he didn't feel alone. We never talked about money, not really. Dad was careful, always saving, always planning for someday. He'd mention the house, the savings account, the life insurance. "It'll be for you girls, when I'm gone." I never thought much about it. I just wanted him to be around as long as possible. The first sign that something was wrong came on a rainy Thursday in March, just a few weeks after Dad died. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through a box of his old papers, bank statements, insurance forms, yellowed receipts. The house felt empty without him, the silence broken only by the ticking of the clock and the soft patter of rain against the window. Lila breezed in, her hair damp, cheeks flushed from the cold. She dropped her purse on the counter and poured herself a glass of wine. "Still going through all that?" she asked, glancing at the pile of papers. "Yeah," I said, rubbing my temples. "There's a lot to sort out. I found Dad's will, but I can't make sense of some of these accounts." "Did he ever talk to you about the savings?" She shrugged, swirling her wine. "Not really. You know Dad, always secretive about money. I'm sure it's all in the will." I nodded, but something about her tone made me pause. She was too casual, too unconcerned. Lila had never been good with money, but she'd always been curious about it. Now, she seemed eager to change the subject. A few days later, I went to the bank to ask about Dad's accounts. The manager, Mrs. Patel, greeted me with a sympathetic smile. "I'm so sorry for your loss, dear," she said, her voice gentle. "Your father was a good man." "Thank you," I replied. "I just wanted to check on his accounts. I have the will here. He left everything to me and Lila, split evenly." Mrs. Patel's brow furrowed as she typed on her computer. "That's strange," she said after a moment. "According to our records, the account was closed last week. The funds were transferred to a new account under Lila's name." My stomach dropped. "That can't be right. I haven't signed anything. Dad's will." She shook her head. "I'm sorry, but the paperwork was all in order. Both signatures were there." I stared at her, my mind racing. "Can I see the documents?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll have to get approval, but I'll see what I can do." That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to make sense of it. Lila wouldn't do something like that. She couldn't. We were sisters. We were supposed to look out for each other. But as the days passed, more things didn't add up. Lila started talking about her wedding, how she wanted it to be big, beautiful, unforgettable. She booked the most expensive venue in town, hired a designer for her dress, put down a deposit on a honeymoon in Greece. When I asked how she could afford it, she just smiled and said, "Mark's parents are helping." But I knew Mark's parents. They were kind, but not wealthy. And Lila had never been good at saving. The knot in my stomach grew tighter. I tried to push the doubts away, tried to believe in my sister. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. A week later, Mrs. Patel from the bank called me back. Her voice was gentle, but there was a firmness beneath it that made me sit up straighter at my kitchen table. "I have the documents you requested, dear. If you'd like to come in, we can review them together." I drove to the bank in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The sky was gray, the kind of day that presses down on you, heavy and unrelenting. I tried to tell myself it was all a misunderstanding, that there would be some logical explanation. But the dread in my chest told me otherwise. Mrs. Patel led me into her office and closed the door behind us. She slid a folder across the desk. "These are the withdrawal forms and the account transfer documents. Both signatures are here, your father's and yours." I stared at the papers, my heart pounding. My name was there, in neat, careful script. But it wasn't my handwriting. I traced the letters with my finger, feeling a cold wave of disbelief wash over me. "I didn't sign this," I whispered. Mrs. Patel's eyes softened. "I thought as much. I've known you since you were a little girl. I'm so sorry." I flipped through the rest of the documents, my hands shaking. The dates matched up with the week after Dad's funeral, when I'd barely been able to get out of bed, let alone go to the bank. The signature was a forgery. I knew it, and I knew who had done it. I left the bank in a fog, the folder clutched to my chest. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the rain streaking down the windshield. My mind raced with memories, Lila's sudden spending, her evasive answers, the way she'd avoided talking about Dad's will. I called her, my hands trembling. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and breezy. "Hey sis, what's up?" I took a shaky breath. "We need to talk. Now." There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear the catch in her breath. "I'm kind of busy with wedding stuff. Can it wait?" "No," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "It can't." She sighed. "Fine, come over." Lila's apartment was spotless, the scent of vanilla candles hanging in the air. She was sitting at the kitchen island, flipping through a bridal magazine. She didn't look up when I walked in. I set the folder on the counter. "I went to the bank." She froze, her fingers tightening on the glossy pages. "And they showed me the documents, the ones with my signature. Only I didn't sign them." She looked up then, her eyes wide and unblinking. For a moment, I saw the little girl I used to protect, the one who'd crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. But that girl was gone. "Lila," I said, my voice breaking. "How could you?" She closed the magazine, her jaw set. I did what I had to do. I stared at her, waiting for her to say more, to apologize, to explain. But she just looked at me, her eyes hard. "You took everything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Dad wanted us to share. He trusted us." She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Dad always loved you more. You were the good daughter, the responsible one. I was just extra. I was tired of being second best. I felt like I'd been punched." "So you stole from me? From us?" She shrugged. "I needed the money. For the wedding, for my future. You have your job, your life. I have nothing." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "You had me, Lila. You had family." She looked away, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's done. There's nothing you can do about it now." I stared at her, the weight of her betrayal settling over me like a shroud. I wanted to scream, to throw something to make her feel the pain she'd caused, but all I could do was stand there, silent and broken. I left her apartment without another word, the folder still clutched in my hand. The world outside felt colder, harsher. I drove home in silence, the only sound the rain drumming on the roof of my car. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the documents. I thought about my father, about the promises he'd made, about the family we used to be. I thought about Lila, about the sister I'd lost long before I ever realized it. I know. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let her get away with it, but I also knew I couldn't fight her in secret. If the truth was going to come out, it had to be in the open. It had to be at the one place she'd never expect, her wedding. The days leading up to Lila's wedding felt like walking through a dream I couldn't wake from. I went to work, smiled at patients, answered questions, but inside I was hollowed out. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face, his gentle smile, the way he'd squeeze my hand and say, "You girls look out for each other, you hear?" I wondered what he'd think of us now. I kept the folder of documents in my purse, the weight of it a constant reminder. I thought about lawyers, about police, about dragging Lila through court, but the thought of making our family's pain public, of turning grief into gossip, made my stomach turn. I wanted justice, not humiliation. I wanted the truth to matter. I tried to talk to her again. I called, texted, even stopped by her apartment, but she wouldn't answer the door. The wedding was all anyone in town could talk about, how beautiful it would be, how lucky Mark was, how proud Dad would have been. I wanted to scream every time I heard his name. The night before the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table, the documents spread out in front of me. I read them over and over, searching for some detail I'd missed, some way to undo what had been done, but the facts were clear. Lila had forged my name, emptied the account, and left me with nothing. I thought about letting it go. I thought about swallowing the hurt, about pretending for the sake of peace. But every time I tried, I saw my father's face, heard his voice. Do what's right, even when it's hard. I knew what I had to do. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. The kind of day that makes you believe in new beginnings. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy dress and my mother's pearl earrings. I tucked the folder into my purse, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. The church was already filling up when I arrived. I could hear the organist practicing, the low murmur of guests greeting each other, the rustle of silk and lace. I found a seat near the back, my heart pounding in my chest. I watched as Mark's family arrived, all smiles and nervous laughter. I watched as Lila's friends fussed over her dress, her hair, her bouquet. I watched as my father's old friends shook hands and shared stories, their voices echoing in the high-ceilinged sanctuary. I felt like a ghost, invisible and out of place. But I knew I had a purpose. I waited, my fingers tracing the edge of the envelope, my mind replaying every conversation, every warning sign I'd ignored. The ceremony began. The music swelled, and everyone stood as Lila walked down the aisle, radiant in white, her eyes shining with tears. For a moment I almost faltered. I almost let it go. But then I saw her glance at me, just for a second, and I saw the fear behind her smile. The vows were said, the rings exchanged. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and the church erupted in applause. I waited until the noise died down, until the guests began to file out for the reception. I stood, my legs trembling, and made my way to the front of the church. Lila was surrounded by friends, her arm linked with Mark's, her laughter ringing out like a bell. She saw me coming, and her smile faltered. "Can I talk to you?" I said, my voice steady. She hesitated, glancing at Mark, then nodded. We stepped into a small side room, away from the crowd. I closed the door behind us and set the folder on the table. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her eyes darting to the door. "I'm giving you one last chance," I said quietly. "Tell the truth, Lila. Tell Mark. Tell everyone what you did." She shook her head, her face pale. "You wouldn't." I opened the folder, spreading the documents out between us. "I have proof. The forged signature, the bank records, everything. If you don't tell them, I will." She stared at the papers, her hands shaking. For a moment, I thought she might break down, might finally show some remorse, but she just looked at me, her eyes cold. "You're jealous," she spat. "You always have been. You can't stand to see me happy." I felt something inside me snap. "This isn't about happiness, Lila. It's about Dad. It's about what's right." She glared at me, her jaw clenched. "Fine, do what you want. I don't care." I gathered the papers, my hands steady. "I will." I walked out of the room, my heart pounding, and made my way to the reception hall. The guests were milling about, laughing, sipping champagne. I found Mark near the head table, his face flushed with happiness. "Mark," I said, my voice trembling. "Can I speak to you for a moment?" He looked at me surprised. "Of course." I led him to a quiet corner and handed him the folder. "You need to see this." He opened it, his brow furrowing as he read. I watched as the color drained from his face, as the truth settled over him like a shadow. When he looked up at me, his eyes were full of questions. Is this real? I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. I'm sorry. He closed the folder, his hands shaking. Thank you for telling me. I watched as he walked back into the crowd, the folder clutched to his chest. I knew the truth was out now. There was no going back. The reception hall was a blur of laughter and clinking glasses, the kind of joyful noise that used to make me feel safe. But as I watched Mark move through the crowd, his face pale and set, I knew that safety was gone. I stood near the doorway, my hands folded tightly in front of me, waiting for the moment I'd been dreading and needing in equal measure. Mark found Lila near the head table, where she was posing for photos with her friends. He touched her arm, gently but firmly, and she turned. Her smile faltering when she saw his face. The photographer's flash went off, capturing the moment her world began to unravel. He spoke quietly, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hand trembled as he held the folder. Lila's eyes darted to me, then back to Mark. She shook her head, her lips moving in frantic denial. But Mark didn't look away. He opened the folder, showing her the documents, his voice rising just enough for the people nearby to turn and listen. A hush fell over the room, the kind that spreads like a cold wind. Conversations died mid-sentence, laughter faded, and all eyes turned to the bride and groom. I saw my father's old friend, Mr. Harris, lean in to whisper to his wife. I saw my aunt clutch her pearls, her mouth open in shock. Lila's voice broke through the silence, sharp and desperate. It's not true. She's lying. She's always been jealous of me. But Mark shook his head, his voice steady. The bank confirmed it, Lila. Your sister didn't sign these papers. You did. You forged her name. You stole from your own family. Lila's face crumpled, her hands flying to her mouth. For a moment, she looked so small, so lost, that I almost stepped forward. But I stayed where I was, rooted to the spot by years of hurt and disappointment. Someone in the crowd gasped. Another guest muttered, "Oh my God." The whispers grew, a tide of disbelief and judgment. Lila's friends edged away, their faces a mix of pity and embarrassment. Mark's parents looked stricken, their joy replaced by confusion and sorrow. My father's best friend, Mr. Harris, stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Lila, is it true?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I just wanted something for myself. I was always second best. I thought if I had the money, I could finally be happy." The room was silent, the weight of her confession settling over us all. I felt a strange mix of relief and grief, as if I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. Mark looked at her, his eyes full of pain. "You could have told me. We could have figured it out together, but you lied. To me, to your sister, to everyone." Lila reached for him, but he stepped back, his face hardening. "I can't do this, Lila. Not like this." He turned and walked away, the folder still in his hand. The guests parted to let him pass, their eyes following him as he left the hall. Lila stood alone, her white dress stark against the polished wood floor, her dreams unraveling in front of everyone she knew. I felt my father's absence like a physical ache. I wished he were there to hold us both, to tell us it would be all right, but he was gone, and we were left to pick up the pieces. My aunt came to stand beside me, her hand warm on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, honey," she whispered. "It's better the truth came out now than later." I nodded, but the words felt hollow. There was no victory in this, no satisfaction, just the cold, hard truth and the hope that maybe, somehow, we could find a way forward. The reception ended early. Guests slipped out quietly, their faces somber. The cake was never cut. The first dance never danced. Lila disappeared into a side room, her sobs echoing down the empty hallway. I stood outside the church for a long time, watching the sun set behind the steeple. The sky was streaked with gold and purple, the air cool and still. I felt empty, but also strangely free. The truth was out. There was nothing left to hide. The days after the wedding felt like living in the aftermath of a storm. The town was buzzing with whispers, about the wedding that ended in scandal, about the sisters who no longer spoke, about the money that had vanished. I tried to keep my head down, to focus on work, but everywhere I went, I felt the weight of curious eyes and hushed voices. I didn't see Lila for weeks. Her apartment was dark, the mailbox overflowing. Mark moved out of their shared place, his car gone from the driveway.
I heard from a friend that he'd gone to stay with his parents, that he was taking time off work.
I felt sorry for him, for the way his life had been upended by secrets that weren't his to keep. I spent a lot of time at my father's house, sorting through his things. The garden was overgrown, the porch swing creaked in the wind. I found comfort in the small routines, watering the tomatoes, sweeping the steps, making coffee in the old percolator. Sometimes I'd sit at the kitchen table, running my fingers over the worn wood, and imagine my father sitting across from me, his hands wrapped around a mug, his eyes kind and steady. One afternoon, as I was boxing up some of Dad's old books, I heard a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat. I opened it to find Lila standing on the porch, her hair pulled back, her eyes red and swollen. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. The silence between us was heavy, full of things unsaid. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, stepping aside. She walked into the kitchen, her steps slow and uncertain. She sat at the table, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I know that doesn't fix anything. I didn't know what else to do." I sat across from her, my own hands shaking. "Why, Lila? Why didn't you just talk to me?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was scared. I thought if I told you you'd hate me. I thought if I had the money I could finally be someone. I've always felt like I was living in your shadow. You were Dad's favorite, the one who stayed, the one who did everything right. I just wanted something for myself." I felt a pang of guilt, sharp and unexpected. I'd never meant to make her feel less than. I'd just tried to do what was right. "You're my sister," I said softly. "That's all I ever wanted you to be." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Can you ever forgive me?" I thought. About it, about all the hurt and anger, about the years we'd spent side by side. Forgiveness didn't come easy, not after a betrayal like this. But I saw the little girl I used to know, the one who'd held my hand in the dark, and I knew I couldn't carry the weight of hate forever. "I don't know if I can forget," I said honestly, "but I can try to forgive. For Dad, for us." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you." We sat in silence for a while, the afternoon sun slanting through the window, dust motes dancing in the light. It wasn't a perfect ending. The money was gone, the trust between us broken, but in that moment, I felt a small measure of peace. Lila stood to leave, pausing at the door. "I'm going to try to make things right. I don't know how yet, but I will." I watched her walk down the path, her shoulders hunched, her steps slow. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew I'd done what I could. I'd told the truth. I'd stood up for myself, for my father's memory, for what was right. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild. I spent more time with friends, took long walks in the park, let myself laugh again. I planted new flowers in the garden, bright marigolds and cheerful daisies, a promise to myself that life could still be beautiful, even after heartbreak. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about Lila, where she was, what she was doing, whether she'd found her own kind of peace. I hoped she had. I hoped we both had.